Because he's that good of a card sometimes. Whereas Spiderweb Imp and the Wolf are really what you always want to find off of Airjammer if possible. So that would explain why sometimes Urius and most of the time Vania are cut from Vengeance.
Really, those Dark Airjammer turns are where you're trying to find the most value, especially if you curve into kind of the Vengeance activators and then have that Airjammer coming right after that. But we'll see if that plays out, and I think really paying attention to the deck matchups, as Exo mentioned, is going to be very key here. We'll see what happens. Is Exo's predictions going to continue to be correct, or will he prove himself to be a fraud? Find out.
Fraud, ouch.
Shadow vs. Dragon. Let's see how this plays out.
All right, so it looks like OnionSheep is actually playing into the matchup in a way that breaks it back down to 50-50. Shadow vs. Dragon, we know, is about as 50-50 as it gets, right? There's not really much there. And Vengeance Blood versus D-Shift, I'm not really sure how that's transitioned that much, but I feel like because Akamarured deck is a little bit slower on the side of Vengeance, like he's not playing the, you know, the 3-drop 4/4, he's not playing like a lot of these huge heavy-hitting followers in the early turns, it might be just slow enough for D-Shift to take over, but again, that matchup is a lot closer than if they were fighting the other way around. So I think this will be a match to watch, as it will come down to play skill and who draws the proper cards.
Definitely. I think the D-Shift is actually the most important list to watch how it performs going forward, because, you know, as you mentioned, against Vengeance Blood, I could see it going either way, despite how instinctively I want to say Vengeance Blood has the advantage in that, because sometimes if you miss one turn of damage with any list, D-Shift is, I feel, optimized enough to just take games from their opponents in that scenario. But right here, you know, we have no experience casting this matchup. I feel like I say this every time. But,
Right.
never heard of it.
Shadow vs. Dragon never happens.
Yeah, I find it weird, though, that Akamarured, like, as we touched on before, how is he not the one playing Shadow in this scenario? I mean, he always brings Dragon as well, but, you know, I wanted to actually touch on it just a little bit. Him not bringing Shadow is really, really interesting to me. I felt that it brought him so much success throughout the whole of the season, and perhaps now if he has a sort of sudden change of heart and he feels like he wants to be less predictable, then I understand it, but it's a very, very late time to be doing that. So, you know, Akamarured stepping out of his comfort zone at the very final moment, it's exciting, to say the least, but we'll have to see how it actually ends up working.
Think about the preparation going into something like today, right? So all of these players are going back, watching all of the VODs of the previous matches of their competitors, things like that. Akamarured has so many games with Shadow that you can really just pick apart every single thing that he's doing, because he doesn't play the Deathly Tyrant text most of the time, right? He doesn't play Dark Blade Fiends. He just plays like very straightforward mid-Shadow. And if you get a tendency for what he likes to mull, what he likes to play, how he likes to evo, things like that, you can really navigate a game against him really well, which was highlighted in the last couple of weeks where he's been losing with it. So I think that, coupled with the fact that maybe he is just kind of sour on it because he has been losing with it lately, that kind of took him into this direction.
That is possible. Today, though, I think we're seeing the alternate list that he brought with Forest has already been banned out, so we won't get to see that. But, you know, later I'm excited to actually see him play Blood. Another thing I forgot to mention is he brought a Blood list that looked like that last time throughout getting here, except it got banned every single time anyone played against him, so I don't think we actually got to see him play it a single time that whole day.
No, we did not. He played, I believe, Shadow and Dragon the entire time. And Vengeance Blood getting banned out. Vengeance Blood's a tricky deck. I mean, Vengeance Blood is a very unpredictable deck. It's kind of like Conjuring Force in that fact. And what I mean by that is you don't really know what your opponent is compiling in their hand when they're playing Vengeance Blood, right? Do they have a mixture of Razor Claws and Blood Wolves? Do they have, you know, Dark General plus, you know, something else, like plus a, you know, a ward? You know, what do they have to stop and push? It's really hard to read. It's really hard to know how much damage they can possibly deal to you. And you almost always have to play super defensively against it. Like, this is the maximum damage they could possibly deal. So I need to make sure that they can't do that. And even if the Vengeance Blood player doesn't have it, so it's really hard deck to play against, and I like the fact that it gets banned most of the time because of that fact.
Yeah, I'm excited to see how that actually ends up going, because it's tough to not leave that sort of thing up when you see even more variants come out of him, like with a deck like Aggro Forest. But for now, OnionSheep still taking his time, even with mid shadow otherwise. Wants to make sure he doesn't make a mistake between a decision of either developing Andrialphus or his Belinus. Dragoon Scyther is interesting, though. I think that means Akamarured Red has a very, very high value on trying to get the board early here.
Yeah, I like it. I think Zombie Party and then just trade straight up is a really nice play. He takes the board completely black. He gets the value out of that Scyther away so it doesn't kill any bigger followers. And if you look at the hand of Akamarured Red, he doesn't really have a play for turn 4, which is really going to hurt him.
You know what? I feel like I never see a player actually pilot this deck and not find any source of ramp within the first 4-ish turns. But at this rate, he's actually just going into a Sybil flat, able to play her on the turn that equals his play points, which is a very rare footage of this list.
Right. Not only that, you won't get the heal off of that Sybil, the first one that you play, so she's even in a worse spot. And if Ceres comes down on turn 4, maybe even pre-evoed against it, can't even deal with it anymore with the new stat line. So very, very rough couple turns ahead for Akamarured Red here.
Looks like it's going as you said. I feel like I need to get a watch and kind of count to observe when exactly OnionSheep starts committing to the plays. Like, does he know to start doing it when the bubble appears and then let it run out, or does he like have a mental timer going on? Because it can be very risky to sort of do this thing.
I think in the early turns he actually does just play to rope, and I don't think he does it on purpose. Like, he's not trying to tilt his opponents. He's not that type of player, right? He just really wants to make sure he has every avenue thought out in his head, and that makes perfect sense. Again, especially on a day like this. Now, I think in the early turns, it's a lot easier. There's less animations, less actual movements you have to do, so taking all of the time makes sense. But once you start getting into turn 7, 8, things like that, you can still take your time, but you still have to allow time for the animations, all of the different movements that you have to do and things like that. So I think we see it going a lot longer now just because he has less options, even though he is still taking the full amount of time.
And sometimes even the simplest things of playing out early curves of whether he developed or had a option to develop Andrialphus anytime sooner, how he's going to use his first evolve, even like things like that where maybe it doesn't make a big difference in the long run can be something that's so influential on the future of the game that he doesn't want to spare any slight risk of regretting something later.
So what do you think about this play? So instead of playing Ceres, like my play in my mind in this matchup would be Ceres pre-Evo, because I noticed that my opponent didn't have any ramp. That means that they have to have a Sybil if they want any chance of coming into this mid game. So considering Sybil, is it still the right play to play the Andrialphus here, or would you have rather played Ceres and pre-Evoed? Would you rather Evo the Belinus and go face? Like, what would your play here be?
Maybe pre-Evoing to go face. Oh, he actually is. That's something that I don't really consider usually doing versus Dragon just because of the sheer amount of responsive power they have against early game damage. But looks like he just has identified he wants to go for a fast game plan. There, I definitely agree with the strength of Ceres, but maybe in games like this, I notice a lot of players don't like using Evos if they don't know for complete certain or with absolute certainty how much value they're going to get out of it. So by playing it out like this, if he forces Akamarured Red to commit a Sybil into the body of Belinus, then that gives him 2 more options in return. He can either trade his Andrialphus into it and let that be that, or then use an Evo on Ceres now and just leave that full body on the board.
It's true. It's a completely different line of play than I was thinking, because if you play the Andrialphus, my thought is to Evo the Andrialphus. But of course, you're Evoing the Belinus. That's the threat that they have to take out, so you have another opportunity to Evo at this turn. And maybe even use something like, I don't know, a Necro Assassin in hand to draw cards, and also clear out the Sybil this turn. Now Ceres is not an option to Evo into the Sybil, so that might just be the play. Very interesting line from OnionSheep here. Definitely not playing this game any way that I would, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. Definitely, it probably means it's more correct.
Yeah, I think what OnionSheep is doing is he wants to play entirely for value, which is interesting to me because when he goes under the guise of, all right, I'm just going to make it a value game. I'm going to focus on involving this Andrialphus on a hand full of followers and just take it easy. And eventually I'll have more resources than Akamarured Red. That makes the evolve on the Belinus that much more interesting. It means that was a moment of diversion or perhaps doubt in that game plan where he says, okay, I have one window to convert to damage here. Maybe if Akamarured Red still doesn't have a good answer to it, then I can follow this line. So committing 1 Evo point to that is a pretty big commitment in my mind. We'll see if that Evo point makes a big difference later.
This is the scary thing with Shadow versus these new Dragon decks that are running Queen of the Red Sea, Genesis Dragon, things like that. Like, if you are going to go on in the aggro game plan, you can't stop. I feel like OnionSheep's last line of plays, this turn specifically really hallmarks the division, like you said, in his thought of being aggressive versus being defensive. Now that he's got a really defensive hand and he kind of threw away the early game aggro, he's kind of at the whims of Akamarured now. Of course, OnionSheep has a lot of reactive plays for the Dragon deck, but because of the nature of this Dragon deck, it can just OTK you out of nowhere. So the longer you take against it, I feel like the worse chances you have of actually winning the game.
While that is possible, I think it's also worth remembering all the time that though this is a combo deck, I don't think Akamarured even runs the Arrogate version of it.
Right.
I'm taking a look now. Nope, it's just 2 Urds in it for the combo, meaning what he wants to do with these Dread Seas, assuming he gets to the turn anytime soon or just throws this hand out for it, is he's either going to do that sort of play we see. I feel like we've seen OnionSheep himself play like this before, where you just throw out the Dread Sea and hope that that right there is enough to win the game off of your opponent not being able to answer it. But getting that 20 damage is going to be rough for him, because at most he has 16, and thanks to those Cereses, OnionSheep has not yet found a turn where he's sort of been pushed down into that range without some kind of way out.
That is true, but if we look at the context of Akamarured's hand, right? Excuse me. He has a very clear-cut line if he wants to go Queen of the Dread Sea. Next turn's a perfect opportunity to get that Forte out of hand, a spike for 5 damage, and then the turn right after, because all the rest of the cards in this hand aren't really that impactful, he can just queen up Genesis Dragon Urd, and we're talking about 5 from Forte, right? And then we're talking about 14 from Genesis Dragon. We're only 1 damage away from lethal with this setup.
So, I do want to point out in this list, it can be very hard to find that 1 damage, especially considering he threw out a Scyther earlier on. And we are reaching those turns where OnionSheep's going to be able to maybe put out a White King or something along those lines, which, with Akamaru's red hand being the way it is, could start to force him into a completely different line, like needing to find a Bahamut or something like that anytime soon.
Right. But right now, I would say that the advantage is on Akamarured because he's got the tools, he's got the time, and things like that. Especially now with cards like that. Being able to clear this Bellness off the table before you actually play Forte just opens up your game plan a lot more. It means they can't do something silly like just soul convert the Bellness to take out your Forte. So that was a perfect draw, I feel. And OnionSheep is playing this super defensively. He's not anywhere close to being able to play Deathly Tyrant for any type of lethal. And I think he's just going to start setting up the value game with Thanes and Nektars like we've seen, but I don't know if it's going to be fast enough to stop what Akamarured is doing.
Right. As you said, he's just going for that Blazing Breath into Forte. I thought for a second that he had 10 play points and could also curve that into Ayla, which would have been phenomenal for him. But here's something that's actually been more and more interesting to me lately. This card right here that we haven't had the chance to talk about really, I feel like has not really been performing that well either last week, and today is probably the most unfortunate hand for it, but Necro Assassin, I don't feel like I've seen a convincing this is why I run Necro Assassin turn yet, despite how even Akamarured ran 3 in his last rendition of Mid Shadow. But there's always situations like this where maybe clearing or finding a good way to clear wasn't really the main problem. Anything else could have done that, like maybe another copy of Zombie Party or other more direct removal, but rather just not having anything that can impact the board or the future state of any damage you're taking. No wards. Something like Dark Blade Fiend would be, resultant style of thinking, but something like that would be incredible here. So,
well,
I feel like Necro Assassin hasn't really been a...
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I feel like it's a mindset thing, right? Like, Necro Assassin's one of those cards that you want to save, especially against dragons, so you can kill all their bigger threats. So it makes you play this defensive game plan as opposed to being more aggressive. Like, you're not just going to be throwing your Necro Assassins out there as 4-play.33 threats, right? Because they're not that strong in value for their cost. And I think if you don't get the proper draws with it, with Lurching Corpses and big tempo plays and things like that, it can really suffer. And I think OnionSheep has to make this play because he knows of the Queen of the Dread Sea combo that could be coming, which again further just keeps OnionSheep on the back foot this entire time. And Akamarured now has the lethal setup with no healing in sight for OnionSheep. Actually, no, because he'll have to discard the Scyther. So maybe he actually just goes into a game plan where he fervors Scythers, and then sets up the combo for the turn after, which is just fine.
It's highly possible. You know, OnionSheep, I feel like he's used his Evos with, at first, like, how should I put this? I feel like he's used them without a consistency of what he's getting out of all of them. He's used an Evo aggressively, he's used one defensively, earlier trying to get a trade out of a Skull Beast, and now without that ability to impact the board quickly, at least it's kind of unfortunate he hasn't drawn Soul Conversion or anything like to find more options. He doesn't have immediate access to a ward through Thane, anything that really stops Akamarured from having this very slow, or otherwise very slow, development of his Queen combo.
Right. And I think it just goes to show, like, and yeah, like you said, one Evo used offensively, one Evo used defensively, and one Evo used for value. So you can kind of see the game plan forming on OnionSheep's head. He's like, I thought I could be aggressive because of the low amount of plays Akamarured had early. And then, okay, never mind. Now I need to build up value with this Andriolphus. And then, oh crap, now I need to deal with this Sybil. So I think he is playing very scared this matchup, and it's really shining through.
Right, and, you know, even beyond that, it hasn't really led him to the development of any particular late-game bomb here. Usually we see Mid-Shadow just excel at this point in the game, and it's not that he doesn't have his options, it's just that he's not progressed far enough in any one of those directions that appeared in his mind, that he's either maybe up on resources against Akamarured, or even just with the initiative on board or anything like that. So, very clean victory incoming from Akamarured, I feel. I don't think there's any line here that OnionSheep can go for that gets him out of this.
Right. I think Saris can develop a heal here, which means that he'll go back up to 15. But again, it's just another stall tactic, right? He's not developing Thane. He's not developing Ektar. He's not putting any damage or pressure on Akamarured. So Akamarured, even if that Saris hits the board, can just play a Genesis Dragon and hit face with it, completely ignore everything else, and then still just keep setting up that Queen of the Dreadsea combo turn after turn.
Here's something I see that is, at first I thought this was just characteristic of the class of Dragon, but it's, as I've watched all these different regions, especially how Japan plays Ramp Dragon and the like, I feel like this sort of threat of holding on to a Dreadsea, or even just having them in the list, that option of having that much damage at any point in the game, forcing your opponent to always have healing or wards for it, is something that I'm starting to notice is very characteristic of NA and EU. There's a much faster style of getting these games through that I'm really starting to pick up from both these regions.
Absolutely. And as we talked about, OnionSheep did not make another defensive player with Saris, which means that this game is going to go in favor of Akamarured with his combo. This is like, I don't know. When I look at Combo Dragon versus the ramp style dragons that we saw in Rage with the Japanese players, I really feel like these combo versions have the edge because of what you were just talking about, that presence. They have this unassuming presence of just, I can kill you, so you have to play around it all of the time, and I think that gives you an advantage. Because like we saw that game, OnionSheep had to play very defensively that game, every single turn, just to stop the damage. He decided to put the Thane out that turn instead of the Saris, because he's probably just reached this point, if I just keep playing defensively with these mediocre threats, there's no way I'm ever going to get ahead, so I just have to hope he doesn't have it. And I feel like I wish he would have done that a little bit earlier. We would have seen the game end earlier, but as far as mindsets go, you can't really just wait forever against these dragon decks. You just have to kind of push for it sometimes.
Something very important to Shadowverse in general is just having that sort of form of burst. And as I kind of relate everything to it, I feel like once we start to approach a rotational format where a lot of the classic storms that we're used to seeing start to rotate out, I think that's what's really going to wake up a lot of players that haven't really had to deal with these kinds of threats towards, just because as they get a little bit weaker, they also start to become the only available sources of burst that some classes will have. And I think that might lead us to a very, very interesting game state afterwards. It's cool enough already to see it happen now, but we already talked this up a bit. Akamarured now moving on to his Vengeance Blood. The first time we've seen him play it, if I'm not remembering this incorrectly, it was Meow that we saw play this against him while it was banned once more. So, entirely new from him.
They fear the Vengeance Blood from Akamarured, absolutely. And this is a matchup that can go either way. Shadow has only developed over time. Vengeance Blood has only developed over time. They all have tons of tools at their disposal. I think Shadow still has a small edge in it, just because it can control the board so well. It does have answers to all of the things that Vengeance Blood can be doing, and it has Saris now. Saris is probably the newest addition for Shadow and or Vengeance Blood in this matchup that really tilts it one way or another.
Right. Sarah's, I feel like, has offered this new tool to Shadow that it hasn't had for a very long time. Usually healing up before Saris was something that Shadow just didn't think about, I feel like. With some maybe really, really old and inefficient sources like Orcus or Soul Eater, which has seen tournament play at that point. This is the first time that the class has really had very easy access to it, on a card that also deals so handily with aggro or other decks that rely on board.
Yeah, well, before it was just Nephthys with, you know, good old Kawi. That was about the extent of healing for Shadow. And a lot of players don't favor Nephthys, and for good reason. It's a really slow deck. It can be consistent, but of course it can also fall off the rails. You know what I mean? It's kind of like Haven in that respect, in where it has all the tools that it needs in order to win against every deck, but how consistently do you draw them? And you can stumble. But it has this crazy endgame that can beat through anything. So it's we do see one player bring it today. OnionSheep did bring it. It did get banned against Fatina, and I think that's a likely story because it is probably his only defensive deck that somebody like Fatina would be scared of. So.
And kind of funny is I've seen Ceres kind of been the card has been in and out of mid shadow lists as we've seen it develop throughout EU especially. I feel like EU is the region of mid shadow. It's where the deck has changed the most and seen the most sort of weird text start to pop up in the deck. But you know, between it and Necro Assassin, I've noticed that 4-cost zone is just such a weird mix-up for the class.
Yeah, and I think Necro Assassin's fine. I think, honestly, if you're trying to play against control, if you're trying to play against not very linear, like, super aggro decks, if you're going to play a 4-drop, it should probably be Erd on the back of a Tentative Knights. We saw that to huge success for Meow when he played it. It looked like every single game he was playing that deck, he was unstoppable. But yeah, Necro Assassin feels kind of weird. I know I played it, but this was seasons ago. I played a few copies of it in my deck just so I could kill Bahamut's and things like that, because you didn't really want to be using your Ektars to kill Bahamut's. And you had less options in the mid game like Andrew Alphys and Saris and things like that. But with all these new additions, I feel like Prince Catacomb at least, instead of Necro Assassin, can really get you a lot more value, because what we've been noticing from these shadow boards, they get cleaned up really easily these days. And without something like Prince Catacomb to back up the boards, they're just kind of cleaned off every turn until they get to 7+.
The exclusion of Prince Catacomb, I feel, makes mid shadow so much more dependent upon making sure it has Bone Chimera on 3. Because I feel like this is a way we've approached even casting this matchup in the past is, you know, what is the one way that mid shadow excels at dealing with control, or even winning mirrors, or even just any game where it has advantages. It pushes its opponent off the rails at the moment where it develops a board that its opponent can never answer, or will never have an answer towards, because it just takes too much time, too much energy to clear out all these followers and the skeletons that they leave behind, the Eekter that pushes them per game. So excluding it for a value card like Necro Assassin, as you mentioned, good versus control, but you know, I feel like this is one of those matchups where it could be good as well. There are a lot of huge, massive bodies that are tough to clear in Vengeance Blood, but still, that lack of Prince Catacomb is just something that's palpable. It's so hard to ignore it.
Well, Prince Catacomb was actually one of the biggest threats alongside of, I can't think of names of cards right now, Phantom Howl, along with Cerberus and things like that, that really pushed Shadow over the edge against Vengeance Blood. But since Phantom Howl and Cerberus have left the deck, the only real way to establish and keep board presence would be something like Catacomb. Now, Necro Assassin, like you said, is probably better in this matchup than we even saw it in the last matchup against Dragon, because Dragon doesn't need to play out its big threats to beat you. It needs to do it all in one turn, or it can do it all in one turn to just finish off the game. But against Vengeance Blood, when you develop a turn like Dark Air Jammer or whatever, a Lurching Corpse and a Necro Assassin could be just what you're looking for to clean up the board.
But you know, as much as we talked about this card, I guess Necro Assassin doesn't have a particularly strong application here. I was wondering what OnionSheep was considering mostly for this turn, whether he plays both out or how he wants to use this evolve. His hand, I feel, is one of the slower that mid shadow can get sometimes. Usually there's enough draw in this deck that it never really runs into a low hand, but we are seeing that rare situation happen to him.
Well, I think it even highlighted the last game, and we've seen this in weeks past. When you don't get your Demon Eaters and Soul Conversions early with Shadow, it's just kind of a clunky mid-range deck, right? It doesn't do a lot. But now with the addition of, especially that Bone Chimera with the Soul Conversion, if the Soul Conversion draws him into more card draw and or more threats coming up, he can be just fine. It also could just draw him into more Andrialphuses and Bellinuses and things like that, which is not what he'd like to see.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. I guess he has multiple lines of how we can go for this, whether he wants to keep the Bone Chimera. As we mentioned, it is the one source of a sort of sticky threat that generates more of a threat as it's cleared. So maybe he targets the Soul Conversion at the injured Skull Beast. Doesn't really look like he wants to, or this doesn't look like a good situation at all to go for Necro Assassin here. It's not really a significant way to fight for the board at all.
Right.
Probably won't want to trade either.
Yeah, this looks right. Just going wide against a deck like Vengeance Blood is really nice. Like, Hungering Horde is really the only punish for this, which it can actually punish this board very well by either Skeletons or Skull Beasts. But filling up the board is exactly what you want to be doing, especially into turn 4, so that it really makes Akamarured think if he wants to play that Belphegor or not, because getting into Vengeance is the main importance of this deck, and if you don't, you can really stall out and give Shadow plenty of time to just fill up the board and win the game.
Mm-hmm. And on the bright side, for OnionSheep, 2 Demon Eaters means he has a long ways to go here as well. Now, did he not attack with Andrialphus? Because 15 is very interesting defense total. I have not really seen people sort of hover or hesitate to attack around.
That is weird. So I guess the thought is 2 spells, right? Razor Claw, Blood Wolf in any combination can put him into Vengeance. But if that is the play, there aren't any play points left over for a Diabolic Grain or something to make it the swing back, so I feel like it's a very interesting attack not to push him to 14 here. I can't say I like it, but I understand where his mind's at. He really just wants to make sure that Akamarured cannot get into Vengeance over the next few turns.
Mm-hmm. Hedging for the future, possibly, and we'll see whether or not this life total makes a difference. Yeah, probably soonish. I feel like Akamarured's already, with this setup of sort of trying to take the board back, making it even safer for himself to get Belphegor out. Maybe not next turn, but sometime after the Subbrewer, possibly, if OnionSheep develops their board again. Which means OnionSheep's current turn is pretty tricky. He has a Demon Eater that I'm sure he will use one of these to try to find some more tools, because he has to answer the board somehow soon. But whether he does that on the back of another Bone Chimera or not is something that's very tricky when it comes to how does he get around the Urius.
Right. And one thing that I actually want to make mention of is Akamarured pinged the Skull Beast instead of going face on an earlier turn. What this is set up is an impossibility for OnionSheep to actually get any value trades on this turn to keep his board if he decides he wants to trade these followers. So very heads-up play from Akamarured to do something like that so that the situation is present. Now it can't just trade into a bat and stay alive for future turns, things like that. So I really liked that type of play that we don't normally see in, you know, ladder games or even a lot of our competitive matches.
Yeah, very impressive foresight. I guess we're seeing it from both players too. OnionSheep had a thought of why he wants to keep Akamarured pretty high. So I think he's in fact forced into this play by the fact that his Skull Beast was so low value without that 1 point of defense.
And of course, clearing off this Urius as soon as possible. The tricky thing about Urius is you can choose to Evo one of these Skeletons or the Skull Beast to clear off the Urius before you play anything else, but again, that limits your ability to actually deal with most of the board. So, gotta take that 1 point of damage, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. The very interesting matchup, the way it's developed so far, is this is probably some of the most like in-depth board trading we've seen out of a match in a long time. Very tough decisions for both players, and either could just ditch it for face at any moment. But being very careful about how they use their evolution points, neither wants to be behind. Tempo is probably the most important element of this matchup.
Absolutely. I think this turn, to set up Ektar appropriately, I think you do want to pop the Chimera, just so that Ektar can have more targets to go face on the following turn, because we're getting really close. Like, because Akamarured dealt the damage to himself, he put himself in range for Ektar lethals, things like that. That's exactly what OnionSheep's doing. But he still has to be worried. Like, say he doesn't clear anything off from Akamarured, right? Say he just like, you know what, I don't need to be defensive at all, I'm fine. We're already staring at 9 damage in play and 9 damage in hand next turn, which is an absurd amount from playing defensively like we've seen Akamarured play so far.
Mm-hmm. The Necro Assassin also finds an amazing turn here. maybe just that single swing that she's gotten off of being able to fully clear the board into the turn that you're describing here could be the strongest turn I've seen her had, like, between these past few weeks and today.
And I think this is going to force some Brewer here. You got to clear the board, especially before turn 7. And these Razory Claws are kind of tricky to use at this point. They can help set you into Vengeance, but every single point of life that you take here is very valuable, especially without any more life gain in hand. The Sabrewer was the last effect.
The only thing about this play that I always, well, I guess it is the best play for trying to deal with OnionSheep, but how this whole line has taken Akamarured is I feel like OnionSheep is at a very strong position now. Even if, you know, Akamarured trades very, very intelligently there. He wants to play around the damage from zombies, anticipating an Eater, but OnionSheep has a lot of options. He can even just develop a Thane, I believe, and he'd still be in a pretty good spot. I had to pause for a second, and a bead of sweat went down my cheek as I was like, wait, that is 3 Razory Claws. That's not lethal, is it? No way.
That's pretty close, though. You know what I mean? Any turn that OnionSheep decides to turn off the gas or decides to not trade with board, these 3 Razory Claws are playable for 9 damage. That's more than half of OnionSheep's complete remaining health. So he's got to be very careful. And it looks like he's playing just that way.
Yeah, modest developments here, but I think this is a really good setup if he just puts down a Lurching Corpse, maybe next to a Belinus. It's still a threat of a lot of damage against Akamarured. It's still a really strong setup for Immortal Thane. You know, I think he also can just ditch the idea of leaving Akamarured out of Vengeance here, just because he's in such a good state.
Yeah, I think he absolutely should. Because, yeah, because, yes, he can activate Vengeance, but again, this is going into turn 7 where Emerald is probably the best play. Still can't activate Vengeance alongside of it. And if he does decide to play these Razory Claws, you're in a perfect position to just push with Ektar. I think OnionSheep has navigated this now towards the mid-game to a perfect game state for him to just keep applying pressure, be the tempo, and with all these Ektars and Thanes in hand, I think it's all but assured at this point.
Emerald just not being in Vengeance. I mean, one thing worth noting is Akamarured is at 11 defense right now. OnionSheep did have that chance to set him as close to Vengeance as possible on a turn where Akamarured can't really make a massive swing or get a lot out of it. And that is the difference of the 1 damage he didn't deal earlier. Like, Akamarured would have been at 13, and that would not have been an attack that OnionSheep could have made had he swung with Andrew Elphys all the way back then.
That's true. That's true. Very, very chess-like, thinking 5 turns ahead, something to that effect. So very, very awesome to see plays like that.
And I mean, even if he didn't anticipate this exact situation coming about, it's that general sense of knowing maybe that damage isn't going to be too important. It'll open up, no matter what the situation ends up looking like. The sort of plays I can make later on, I'll be more safe to set his health to where I exactly want it. So yeah, really, really impressive stuff.
That just goes to show, again, how hard it is to play against Vengeance Blood, right? It's like, do I set them in outside of Vengeance? How far do I set them outside of it? What can they actually do to go into it? You know, it's a very tricky deck to play around, but OnionSheep has found his way here.
Yeah, and at a glance, that ruthless series of smashes into Akamarured is disabled completely. 3 cards in his hand of all the Razory Claws, and the remaining swings that Akamarured, it does not look like nearly enough to actually remove any of the damage or clear the board here against OnionSheep.
And important to note, OnionSheep did not need to draw a Ceres to win this matchup this game. He did not need to heal. He played to the board very perfectly, did not allow Akamarured to keep anything in play whenever he had the chance to take off Akamarured's board. So just interesting gameplay. If you guys are looking on how to play against Vengeance Blood, this is a good one to keep in your record books to just understand your turns. How much damage should I deal? How should I play to the board? How should I play my hand? I think OnionSheep definitely did a good job this game.
Now, the matchup we're going to be moving into right after this one, I think, is going to be the biggest clincher between these two, between D-Shift and this list, because we're seeing, I mean, Akamarured's list is not exactly what I'd call the fastest of any Vengeance I've ever seen. It has a lot of defensive and reactive tools. It looks like it's equipped to beat a lot of decks that are like aggro or along those lines. to maintain good control of the board and make tempo swings, but none of that, I think, is going to end up mattering versus D-Shift. So whether it can be a solid enough deck on the in-between of all of that and just play for damage is a test that we're going to have to see. Akamarured Red pass if he wants to move on.
That's true. No Devil of Vengeances, Soul Dealers, not really the focus of this style of deck. So definitely not looking to push as fast and as hard as possible, like some Vengeance Blood decks, which could give enough time to D-Shift. Now, one thing I didn't notice until right now, do you see OnionSheep's name right now? Do you see this?
His name?
Yeah. I'm not going to say that one out loud, but his name's a little weird. What did he say? Perfection? Is that what Akamarured's little poster said? It said perfection. I don't know what he was perfection
I think that was it. I saw a lot. Like, that was a really busy paper that I started, and I was like, what is this, homework? Like, is this a checklist?
Yeah, it's probably his homework
Maybe
from last
it's like
night.
Maybe it's like an emote board. Like, a player will make like a board of a lot of different things they want to say and be like, I'm gonna go with this one. And at the risk of showing you their entire plan, they just zoom in on like one particular word on it.
Mofu, don't make this a thing. You remember how, I don't know if you're of this same ilk, but did you remember soundboards? Like, were they ever popular in your era?
Yes.
Okay,
I
so like where you would even call up your friends and have like a soundboard hooked up to your speakers and just play like random like phrases from movies and like random actors and things like that at them and just completely confuse people.
Yeah.
I don't want this to become an emoji like board culture.
Well, you would have to draw them like by hand. So I think
that's fair. Okay. All right. At least there's something to it. But yeah, if like you're just on a Skype call with somebody and in order to identify how you were feeling, you just pointed to a word or an emoji that you drew. Perfect. Perfectly bad.
I tried to squint really hard to see what was on his little piece of paper there, but it looked like I am feta. Like a feta cheese steak or something like that. I can't read cursive, honestly.
That's okay. That's okay. Cursive's kind of like, if we're talking about dead, it's not a language. It's a written form of language. Cursive's definitely there. I think cursive being taught to me was kind of whatever. You know how I write? I write in all caps, big block letters, so that everyone can read everything that I write very clearly. I don't use lower cases. I still use my punctuation, of course. But I don't think there's any use for lowercase words or letters rather when you're actually writing something out. On text, like when you're typing, maybe that makes sense, but not when you're actually handwriting things anymore, I don't believe.
Well, that's a really Roman way of thinking, actually, before
Absolutely.
The lowercase existed. I mean, I always feel like, though, whenever someone writes only in all caps, I imagine in my head they're like dual wielding or like two-handed wielding the pencil, like focusing really hard on trying to make sure it sounds like they're shouting whatever they're writing.
Yes. Very, very anime style aggressive writing with two hands at the same time. Perfect motions. Yes. I like it.
But personality, unlike Akamarured Reds. But to get into the actual game, though, OnionSheep actually not spending that much time to actually think about the future on that one, which is this was the one deck where I was expecting him to do that the most with. But I'll probably see it happen. I feel like his opening hand is really, really strong here. And that has made it even stronger than I was about to start talking about. Both of his win conditions already developed, or I used developed, I think, too much as a word, already found, and he can start working on them with Kaleidoscopic Glow working on 2 Wind Blasts as well. Chimera also just sitting there to enjoy the ride. He has answers to a lot of stuff coming up, considering Akamarured Red's list not having very high defense followers that he'll need to kind of raise this Wind Blast up for.
Right, and Spiderweb Imp is one of these weird tools that I feel like are really good against D-Shift for many reasons. One, Kaleidoscopic Glowing it feels good because in a real scenario or like in an outside Vengeance Blood scenario, you're just like, okay, I bounced their drop, they have to take 2 more damage, things like that. Conversely, when you're playing against D-Shift, being able to self-damage yourself is very important early, especially if you don't get Belphegor, so that you can execute your game plan a lot faster. So Kaleidoscopic Glow, not really the best option against Spiderweb Imp, even though it looks like it. Not only that, but the 4 defense that Spiderweb Imp has gets around Magic Missiles, gets around Angelic Snipes, sometimes even has to be Wind Blasted just so that you can evolve into some other followers that they have. So I really like Spiderweb Imp against D-Shift, and especially against Kaleidoscopic Glow, as weird as that sounds.
I've seen a lot of very interesting uses of it, actually. I don't remember where in my brain this is from, but I know Spiderweb Imp is a very strange kind of 2-drop that you can evolve, and it just completely walls off when pre-evolved, Magic Owl and likes. It's just that is a risk you take versus another Kaleidoscopic Glow, but it leads to some very interesting interactions between the players, what they're expecting to see from each other. But this hand from OnionSheep is only starting to look better and better. If you can find something like Fate's Hand, I think that's what really sets him off into a really easy to execute combo later on.
Absolutely, and in saying that, I think that Akamarured Red's hand is also shaping up very nicely. He's got Razor Claw set up for next turn, into Blood Wolf to set him into Vengeance on turn 5, and he already has a Dark General to push with that Evo point even later going on. So I think his damage plan is right on track, and I think OnionSheep's plan is right on track. Who can actually execute is what we're going to find out.
Yeah, if I know anything about Vengeance Blood, it's that if they have a strong opener, and they're in Vengeance really early on around that turn 4 zone where they want to be, it's extremely difficult to survive until about turn 8 to 9-ish, because they've had so many chances to win the game with the absurd amounts of damage they can deal up to that point. Whereas conversely, the damage which you have to deal to yourself to be in Vengeance, looks like he's going for that play that you mentioned, by the way, going alongside the Double Razor Claw, maybe holds one? Nope. Anyway, as I was saying, being at that health total against D-Shift can be so dangerous because of how they've acquired Giant Chimera. It makes it that much easier to just sweep through everything and deliver that lethal hit through just D-Shifting on turn 8. So, really hard to call it so far.
Absolutely true. And this next turn for Akamarured is going to be the most awkward, right? He's going to have to play his Blood Wolf and Evolve. And that will put OnionSheep down to 9, which is a perfect spot. It will put him into Vengeance, but he doesn't really have any other plays besides that at the moment. So he'll have to wait until following turns to keep pushing damage unless he draws something else here. Which means that OnionSheep might have a turn or two of leeway to actually get something going here. But without any wards at the moment, we don't see any Golem Assaults in hands, anything like that to stave off damage. OnionSheep might have some trouble actually stopping all the damage Akamarured can deal.
Absolutely. I think another really dangerous possibility is if this Air Jammer finds another one of his Blood Wolves, then that could just push him over the amount of damage he's going to need soon.
I like it. And as you notice, Akamarured is really slowing OnionSheep down as well. He's not playing very many threats to the board. That's why that double Razor Claw play was so good. Just because you don't have to give anything else for OnionSheep to be able to spell boost off of. You don't really need to put anything down because the Blood Wolf, obviously one of the better Evo targets. Looks like he's actually not going with the Blood Wolf plan. Okay. But finds one anyway.
That really is interesting. That feels like a risk to me because that could have definitely been a dud. If it drew a Spiderweb Imp or Urius, then it's still not that bad of a play, but you did give OnionSheep some targets, and it's not that realistic, I think, to expect OnionSheep to not have some way in hand of at least dealing with enough of it. But while I say that, he also has been very aggressive this whole time. He's been putting down a very strong amount of pressure. Maybe decides, even if I low roll this, it's still going to put on enough pressure that forces OnionSheep to spend all his time playing out removal. I still got Blood Wolf into Dark General next turn, though. Only one Evo point left, so it doesn't really matter.
This is just it. The fact that Dark Air Jammer pulled a Blood Wolf very specifically means that Akamarured has a lethal setup next hand with what he has, right? He's got 6, 8, never mind. He's 1 damage off. I'm sorry. But then the Starling Chains can come down to finish off or any other thing. So this is on OnionSheep. He's got to win within the next few turns here or else he's just going to die.
Yeah, it's funny that you canceled out of that because I was like, you know what? You're right. I think it is over because OnionSheep doesn't have any way to get his Chimera any lower. His Fiery Embrace is still at 5. He actually can't clear this board out, even though it did pull a Blood Wolf, which is probably the lowest stat distribution he could have found.
That's right. It's funny because the Chimera was an opening hand. It's just we didn't see the Insights. We didn't see the Angelic Snipes. We just saw Wind Blast, Kaleidoscopic Glow. And because of the way Akamarured played, those Wind Blasts couldn't come out earlier to spell boost more of the hand. Very hard to deal with any of this. And yeah, Akamarured just going to run away with this one.
And Dark General, fully featured, about to be a leader, in fact. So let's see if we'll be able to take the killing blow on this one.
That one I can't wait for. So, you know, I don't want this game to end because as soon as this game ends, Randy's going to call me a fraud. And I'm not prepared for this. But Akamarured is going to move forward here. And OnionSheep, my friend, we'll see you next time.
Fraud.
No!
Akamarured taking the win 2-1, and you know, hey, no knocks on Exodium. I think they were very well thought out predictions, good predictions, but sometimes.